The concept of a Lycan or a werewolf stalking the darkness just beyond our campfires is something that has been talked about amongst humans for quite some time. Whether it's a skinwalker, werewolf, demon, it really doesn't matter. All that really matters is that it's bigger, stronger, tougher, and more capable of ripping someone apart than I guess a human is. Its resistance to force multiplication is off the charts, rendering only things to force exponentials being the only real answer to putting these things down. God, this joke is getting old. But much like how Umbrella would take their inspiration from the viruses that they actually went on to produce, such as the T virus and G virus, kind of utilizing the progenitor virus as a starting point, others would use the naturally occurring species in an environment to attempt to achieve their goals by creating monsters. But before we even get into the rest of this intro, I want to kind of stop for a moment. I will attempt to limit spoilers in this video, but it's about Resident Evil Village or Resident Evil 8. So if you haven't played this game yet, go get it. It's an absolute blast. Also, I turned 29 Tuesday, so if you would like to do some sort of birthday thing for just press F in chat for my 20s. Checking to see if you are subscribed would be awesome, but only if you want to, obviously, though. There's no pressure. Also, purists will say that they hate RE8 because it's more actiony than the past titles, but man, it is a blast to play. All right, so ready to keep going? You ready? You sure? Okay, spoilers ahead. The main antagonist, being Mother Miranda, used the naturally occurring flora beneath the town that is completely unlike anything Umbrella has created. Her ultimate goal of attempting to bring back her daughter, whose end was met during the Spanish flu era, would require her experimenting with the flora in an effort to find a suitable host for her daughter's mind. Over time, she began experimenting with a parasitic nematode, combining it with the mold from underneath the town and creating the Cadou. And believe it or not, that's the actual French pronunciation. I looked it up. Now, this will be an episode all on its own in the future to discuss the host rejection and acceptance, which requires us to talk about the big vampire woman, which there will absolutely be something on that in the future. But until more people play it, let's stick with the basics. The rejection of a host's affinity for the parasite, which results in the Lykans. So in today's episode, we will discuss this mutation leading to the wolf-like infected, the progression of the disease, and how it changes them morphologically, and why some seem to be afflicted while others just change into different creatures. So first things first, we need to discuss what actually happened to these people to know why they have become the way they are. At the beginning, shortly after having her child expire via Spanish flu, Mother Miranda set off on a sort of grievous walk. As she walked along, she would ultimately discover a cave containing a sort of mold known as the megamycete. This type of organism was sort of a hive mind type of deal. Surrounding the megamycete existed the mold that the megamycete could use to infect hosts. Through her experimentation with the mold, Mother Miranda discovered hosts could be infected and changed. As she continued her work, she would discover that she could infect a parasitic nematode native to the area. Upon doing so, she learned that it was capable of changing the bodies and minds of those people she infected, but the parasitic nematode had a different compatibility for different people. If the host was capable of accepting the nematode or the Cadou with little issue, then they were good to go, and they were capable of keeping their bodies and minds relatively intact, but mostly just their minds. In this case, things like Lady Dimitrescu was one that seemed to have the highest affinity for the Cadou. However, most humans would not accept the parasite so easily. In an effort to find the most suitable host in which to revive her daughter, Mother Miranda would need a lot of people to be voluntolds. Utilizing the population of the small town, virtually almost everyone was infected with this parasite combined with the mold. It would seem that in reality, a certain type of person would have more affinity for the Cadou as opposed to others, and virtually the entire town was turned into Lykans. Later on, the townsfolk were quickly overwhelmed, but slowly at first, it was just a few people here and there that went missing. But once a tipping point was reached, the entire town was overtaken, with all survivors either turned or eaten. As many other townsfolk attempted to retreat back to their house, it became apparent that even bites from the afflicted were enough to slowly over time turn those who were bitten into infected Lycan, who would then mutate and then turn others into Lycan, or just straight eat their hands. So to understand the Lycan, we must first observe the Lycan to get a good idea on how they have changed. And with that, it's been a hot minute, hasn't it? So today we finally get back to normalcy. Starting with the feet, we see this creature still maintains a plantigrade structuring. The mutation at this point has not afflicted the person to the point of skeletal alterations, or at least not major skeletal alterations. However, this will change over time. The feet themselves still possess all 5 toes, but gray-white skin is seen likely due to the temperature of the environment, leading to capillary constriction to maintain body heat. Moving up the legs, we can see that actually the body is much more muscular than average. Now, assuming everybody in town wasn't an Olympic bodybuilder, the leg sizes would indicate that shortly after the infection by the Cadou, the body would have likely added completely new muscle strands as opposed to just building on what was already there. The idea is based on the fact that to build up torn muscle strands thicker, they need to be damaged. Those who were infected likely would not meet the stipulation, and considering the Cadou's ability to mimic humans, adding muscle mass strands would be par for the course based on the mutations that we see later. Moving up to the pelvic region, again, muscle mass has been increased increased, but where it's most prevalent is the abdominal muscles, chest, shoulder, and arms. In this area, we can clearly see muscle has likely been doubled, giving the Lycan a much more potent grappling ability as they are able to overpower standard humans. Moving up to the head of the Lycan, hair follicles have been sent into overdrive, likely indicating an increased metabolism and cellular activity in these areas, which, again, considering the amount of changes we will see in later forms of those infected, this could make perfect sense. The canines have also been increased in length as well, and the teeth themselves have become sharper, indicating that bone growth is also taking place within the body, leading to more offensive capabilities. Down at the hands, claws have shown up with sharper fingernails being present. These changes, however, have not made it impossible to grab tools such as axes and machetes, which the Lycan can actually still use to attack any remaining survivors that they come across. Which, speaking of this, let's discuss the intelligence of the average Lycan for a moment. With the Cadou having mostly rejected the host body, or at least the host body rejecting the Cadou, but still utilizing it as a meat mech suit, the intelligence will degrade severely for the infected. However, not to the level seen with the T-virus. Lycans are still very much so social creatures, and likely this is due to the fact that humans themselves are social by nature, which is deeply rooted in our brains. In fact, so deeply rooted, it is thought to be housed within the instinctual portions of our brains. While socialization itself deals with other areas of the brain, such as the cerebrum, which is degraded in standard Lycans, the deepest portions, the urge to actually socialize, still exist. Lycans will typically hunt in packs ranging in size from just a few to literally the entire population of the town. However, there's still a hierarchy that exists amongst the group members, with the largest being in control. This complete Alpha Lykan stands at well over 10 feet tall and appears not only to have suffered the same affliction as the rest of the Lycans, but likely had a higher affinity for the Cadou, and because of this, the intelligence was retained, but the body was changed even further. And there will be a actual separate video on this guy entirely. There's gonna be like so many of these. Anyways, for the standard Lycan, heading back to intelligence, tool usage has not been completely lost as mentioned with the machetes and axes. However, they also still retain the ability to ride horses and control the beast, meaning two things. The first is that they may not be completely mindless, or that different intelligences exist between different individuals. As we have seen, there actually was a horse with a bite in its neck, ending it in the process, meaning that that particular Lycan didn't see the horse as a tool. Because of this, we can assume that those riding the horses may have retained much more of their humanity post-infection. The second thing this could indicate is that the timing of the infection has everything to do with how the brain operates, and I'm kind of favoring this one, and we will discuss it a little more in depth later and how the infection actually affects the brain. But with your standard newly infected Lycan, while it is resistant to damage, they are not too terribly difficult to take down. Standard force multipliers will do the job, granted it takes a lot more lead down range to put them down for good. Handheld tools are also capable, but the issue is they can attack and have the ability to basically sever carpal bones with a bite from the rest of your hand, making them formidable should you not have the aid of any tools around you. As the Cadou infection takes deeper hold within the human body, eventually all those cellular changes will begin to take shape. The skeleton of the person will be elongated and the ribs themselves will be increased in size. Their pelvis will stay roughly the same, with femurs and tibia as well as fibular bone becoming longer. Eventually, this will result in a late stage Lycan. While taking what appears to be probably a few days post-infection, it can be assumed that most of the standard Lycans will enter this form known as the Varkalak Alpha. Even though it has Alpha in the name, it's not the true Alpha. And this will happen as their bodies continue to alter and change. The reasoning here is, while at first we may only see one of these skulking around, as time passes, we see more and more, indicating that this form is not unique. But what form are they going to take on? Well, let's do a twofer, shall we? Starting with the feet of the Alpha, which is not to be confused with the 10-foot tall Lycan man that we have seen who is the true Alpha, the body has become much more animalistic, returning back to the digitigrade structuring of the feet. The previous human will now walk on the balls of their feet as it skulks around. However, it can be seen at certain points walking on its full foot despite the angle of the ankle that it sits at, which indicates it has not fully converted to digitigrade structuring, but it is still in the process. Moving further the legs, we see that the hair has increased exponentially here. Well, actually, maybe not as much as you might think. The fact is, humans actually still have the same amount of hair follicles as chimps. We just have finer hair, so we aren't covered in thick fur. So really, the hair here has changed to become a thick coat, and probably new hair follicles haven't been made. And this likely would be a direct response to the frigid environment and the tampering of the Cadou within cellular activity. Moving up to the pelvic region, it's clear at this point that it would have likely maybe increased its size, but it's really more of the angle that has changed. Human pelvises do not sit to allow for crawling, as ours are more forward facing, which allows us to stand upright. Due to the structure of the body, it can be assumed it now leans further back, much like what we see with a gorilla. Moving up to the back, we see the spine has increased in length and size, allowing for a larger torso. Being a quadruped now, this has led to the creatures to have much more muscular shoulders, shoulders, seeing as they now aid in walking. Moving down to the arms, we see the same muscle increase in the biceps and triceps, but the forearms have been lengthened, allowing the creature to sort of walk with its head held at a higher position to see better. The creature still possesses all 5 fingers, and on each finger now are large, fully grown in claws. The hands have changed in a way like the feet, meaning that the creature now walks on the balls of its hand rather than on a flat palm. And this was accomplished by, just like the feet, having the tarsal bones lengthened, the carpal bones have been lengthened as well. Moving up to the head, it is the stuff of nightmares. Amid a shaggy amount of fur covering the top of its head sits a large face with a mouth split unnaturally far back. Attempting to grow into a snout, the maxilla has been increased in length as well as the mandible. Now sharp teeth sit lining the mouth, and much like a wolf, it opens all the way back to the molars. The eyes have now been molded into large, yellow, forward-facing eyes, and the overall face barely resembles anything that was once human. The intelligence of this creature almost appears to now be completely instinctual based. Whereas the more newly infected seem to retain at least some of their intelligence for a while, it may be a trend of decreasing ability to think and remember how to use tools, and this is the ultimate form that the Cadou has inflicted upon a human that it deems unusable. So the question is, what exactly is the Cadou doing to the body of a person? Why do some people seem favorable over others? To answer the first question, it's all based on affinity for the parasite. Now the nematode itself is incapable of inflicting these issues upon a normal human being. The mold appears to have a much more different effect on the human body, such as in the case of those infected with the mold in RE7. So the combination of both mold and nematode are responsible for what we see in the events of RE8. The next question is why it affects people so differently, and we will likely have to do this, and this will be something that we will kind of explain through the weeks of covering Resident Evil 8 in the future as we begin to kind of develop a pattern of who it affects and how it affects. But clearly with the Lykans, it kind of really just comes down to the immune systems and possible cellular co-receptors, allowing for the cell to be manipulated genetically and more favorable or less favorable. And concerning the co-receptors, I've actually covered that in the mold video I did for Resident Evil 7. If you would like to see that, I'll actually link it at the end of this video. So we'll probably be leaning a little more towards the immune system causing these issues. But for the Lykans in particular, it would seem an issue would arise as the Cadou did not take well to their bodies. Shortly after a person's infection with the Cadou, unlike the 4 lords who had their bodies interact with the parasite in a favorable way, the townspeople would have an interaction that made it particularly difficult for the Cadou to react well. Now, considering it's a parasite, this is not really all that uncommon for our bodies to come into contact with. Every day we might come into contact with parasites, so how do we really fight these things, and why might this cause issue for the Cadou? Well, as a parasite enters the body, typically it will enter the bloodstream. Within the bloodstream, you have things known as complements. As the parasite floats through, these complements will attach to the outer portion of the parasite, to which white blood cells will happen upon this parasite and realize it's not supposed to be there by finding these complements attached to that particular parasite. Upon its detection, your body will launch an attack on this in an attempt to destroy it like it would with any other invader. Dendritic cells will become involved after coming into contact with the parasite and then activate B cells of the body to begin building antibodies. These antibodies will begin attacking it, making it weaker over time, and allowing 3 main cells to now move in and hit it with parasite destroying strength. Eosinophils will be the first as they move in, attach to these antibodies and complement receptors, lyse themselves over the parasite, releasing cytotoxic material, which can melt and severely injure the invader, or possibly even outright destroy it, but at minimum, hopefully at least hurting it. Neutrophils will also attempt to absorb small enough parasites and destroy them, much like how it would destroy bacterial pathogens. And eventually, these parasites would attract the attention of the NKT cell, or the natural killer T cell, and this will move in and attack with its own cytotoxic materials. This can ultimately cause the parasite to reach a state of fluid imbalance as it lyses the cellular membrane of it, and then cause it to lyse entirely, destroying it. Now, it kind of sounds like from what I just said that our bodies have it all figured out, doesn't it? Well, the issue is we are actually not that great at fighting parasitic infections, and because of this, natural abilities of parasites to move in typically with the thicker exteriors on them, a lot of parasites can live within our bodies despite being under attack from our immune systems, because that's really how they've evolved to deal with hosts. Otherwise, they wouldn't exist at all. And this has made them quite successful at surviving our body's defenses. What I believe has happened to the townspeople is they have a very standard form of immune system. Upon the Cadou entering them to implant the mold, while the Cadou itself is under attack from their immune systems, they may have increased, say, inflammation and activation of their symptomatic pathways when dealing with an infection. When the body is infected, it goes into overdrive to drive out the pathogen. While this was happening, the mold the nematodes possessed was also still infecting cells. At this more activated state, the body would maintain these levels as seen with hair growth and muscular growth as well as bone growth. What started as a typical response would mean the parasite could actually not take too well to the body, and this would make sense to me, honestly. I mean, don't you find it odd that the townspeople, the people who would live there for generations would have some resistance to the naturally occurring parasite in the area? No, you don't find it odd? Well, then you're correct, because also some context clues are those of why Lady Dimitrescu, Donna Beneviento, Salvatore Moreau, and Carl Heisenberg were likely hailing from different parts of Europe and may not have been as successful with their immune responses as indicated by the Cadou having a higher ability to exist within their bodies. Likely the townspeople possessed some form of previous memory in dealing with this parasite, and as a result, this increased the overall aggressive response of their bodies to the similar parasite, and this ultimately caused them to become monsters as opposed to people. And you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, seriously, Roanoke, how easily could the townspeople really form an immunity like that? Well, look no further than the brain-eating amoeba in my neck of the woods known as Naegleria fowleri. This parasite exists in soils, waters, pretty much everywhere actually, so then why down here in the south do we not have people dropping left, right, and center from this infection? Well, it's because likely everyone here has drunk the water and already come into contact with this parasite. Our bodies figured out what it was, made antibodies to it, and now it doesn't have the capability to flourish in a population as our immune system stomps it out before it starts eating holes in our brains. People not from around here sometimes go out in the lakes here and then contract the parasite as their bodies aren't aware of what the parasite is, and this can actually result in their end if the right set of circumstances happen. The idea basically can be applied to the four lords and the townspeople. The four lords are clearly not from the area. I believe Lady Dimitrescu is from like France or something. Salvatore Moreau is Spain. Donna Beneviento is from Italy, and Carl Heisenberg is like Austria or Germany or something. So they're not from Eastern Europe. Ergo, they may not have had the antibodies to the nematodes that were used to become the Cadou. And based on this, the Cadou were able to easily migrate to where they needed to be and then integrate into the body without an effective immune response. This in turn allowed them to survive with their brains intact. Whereas if the Cadou met resistance from the antibodies produced by the townspeople, the parasite would not be able to move to where it needed to go, and this in turn created a whole host of issues. The symptomatic response, if it were just an altered form of parasite, would have likely just completely taken out an infected person. But with the mold running things internally, their bodies would continue to function as their brains degraded over time, likely from inflammation and meninges swelling issues that continue to put pressure on the brain. Eventually, after the immune response ceased, because the mold had complete control over the meat suit, the brain would have kind of still been quite destroyed except for more instinctual leftovers, but the metabolism would still remain ramped up to dangerous levels, causing the changes that we see. So the next question is, why a Lykan? Well, really, being a Lykan is more of a colloquialism. If we break down what these people are, they really just have an overstimulated hair follicle issues, beefed up bodies from an overactive metabolism, as well as continual changes and mutations induced by the mold itself, which, I mean, that's pretty much known as a staple in this series. The reality is that they look like werewolves, but really they're just like every other infected that we have seen, just a new flavor. And as the mutation continues, we see them become almost literal wolves or versions of them. And the only thing I could think of at this point is the activation of genes within cells, forcing the body to take on a new form. And with the changing and activation of genes in the right areas, this could, in theory, cause what we have seen amongst the town people. And this is only possible after the infection continues long enough to bypass the immune system activation, which, as you would probably guess, would take time. But I imagine as we go along in the series, we will continue to learn more about why it affects others in ways that they are still capable, and others in ways that just seem horrible.